Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Our top story: 9 Chinese nationals either arrested, charged, or pleading guilty all in one day, and all tied to U.S. national security. One of them, a Chinese hacker caught in Italy, is accused of stealing critical U.S. COVID-19 research during the pandemic. Details on the investigation.
It sort of reinforces the idea that this was a bit of an operation where the CCP was not only poisoning the world, and particularly the United States, but monitoring how we would react and monitoring the health impact on the targets.
A Chinese student with a military research background is pleading guilty to visa fraud. He hid key details about his education to get around U.S. visa restrictions. Europe is facing a rise in Chinese covert operations. Ukrainian authorities arrested 2 Chinese men accused of trying to transfer classified missile system documents to Beijing. And the U.S. is moving to block foreign adversaries, especially China, from buying American farmland. It's about protecting both the food supply and national security.
Food security, just like energy resilience, just like where we get our water, that's all national security.
On Tuesday, the Justice Department announced the arrest of a Chinese state-sponsored hacker responsible for breaching thousands of computers worldwide, including U.S. government agencies. He targeted valuable U.S. COVID-19 research. According to the DOJ, Xi Zhouwei was arrested last Thursday in Italy. Xi and his co-defendant Zhang Yu face a 9-count indictment for their alleged involvement in computer intrusions. The DOJ says both men acted under orders from China's Shanghai State Security Bureau, which conducts foreign intelligence services for the Chinese Communist Party. The indictment alleges Xi stole critical U.S. COVID-19 research for the CCP. Beijing still withheld key information about the virus and its origins. The pandemic has claimed millions of lives worldwide. A Chinese student could face up to 5 years in prison and a $250,000 fine after pleading guilty Tuesday. Why? He admits leaving out key information on his 2021 U.S. student visa application. Specifically, he didn't disclose that he studied and did research on sensitive technology at a school banned by President Trump for ties to China's military. During Trump's first term, he banned individuals linked to 8 Chinese colleges and those funded by China's state-backed Scholarship Council from entering the U.S. The order targets Beijing's military-civil fusion strategy. That refers to China's push to acquire foreign technologies that could boost its military. The rule took effect in summer 2020, just 1 year before the Chinese student applied for his U.S. visa. Jiang Jiaxuemo concealed his experience at Beijing University, one of the Chinese schools blacklisted by the U.S. He secured his visa and entered the State University of New York at Buffalo in 2021 to study aerospace engineering. Over a year later, he applied for doctoral programs in similar fields at other U.S. universities. In his application, Zhang disclosed he had studied at Beijing University, where he conducted research in 2 top Chinese labs backed by Beijing. According to the FBI, one of those labs was co-founded by a Chinese military entity. Court documents say the State Department would never have granted Zhang a visa if they had known about his experience. Zhang has pleaded guilty to visa fraud. His plea deal says he will likely be deported. 7 Chinese nationals were charged on Tuesday in Massachusetts. They are accused of running a multi-million-dollar illegal marijuana grow operation, as well as engaging in money laundering and illegal immigrant smuggling across the Northeast. Prosecutors say the group used multiple suburban homes in Massachusetts and Maine as illegal grow houses. They say the group smuggled in Chinese workers and withheld their passports until debts were repaid. The alleged ringleader is Chen Jiangxiong of Braintree. Suspects are accused of laundering millions in profits and using the money to buy luxury homes, cars, and jewelry. 6 suspects were arrested Tuesday. 1 remains at large. Federal agents seized hundreds of pounds of marijuana, hundreds of thousands in dollars in cash, and luxury goods during raids. If convicted, the defendants face up to 20 years in prison on the most serious charges. Authorities say the investigation is part of a nationwide crackdown on transnational criminal enterprises. Concerns over Chinese covert operations are growing across Europe. Zooming in on the war in Ukraine, a Chinese father and son were recently arrested, accused of trying to transfer classified missile system documents to Beijing. Ukrainian prosecutors say the father has deep ties to the Chinese regime. That missile system played a key role in sinking a flagship of the Russian Navy when the war began. Moving to France, a French newspaper recently reported that the country's top intelligence agency uncovered 9 secret Chinese police stations in France. Authorities say all these stations have been shut down, but plainclothes Chinese agents could still be active, secretly carrying out Beijing's orders in the country. Their tasks include harassing Chinese dissidents and forcibly repatriating diaspora members to face punishment back home. DC-based think tank the Heritage Foundation says China runs more than 100 police stations in more than 50 countries. In 2023, human rights NGO Safeguard Defenders revealed that at least 7 such outposts exist in the U.S. One of those was shut down by the FBI. To discuss the hacking by a Chinese national into U.S. government agencies, NTD's Carrie Dunn spoke with Steve Yates, Senior Fellow and National Security Analyst at the Heritage Foundation.
Steve, thanks for joining us. It seems like every week there's some breakthrough arrest that shows the extent of China's unrestricted warfare. What do you make of this latest hacking indictment?
Well, I agree. And on the good news side of it, it seems that there are maybe some additional resources being put at this intelligence problem. So they're not only detecting, but also building cases and apprehending people and telling us a bit more about it. So hopefully that is an indicator that there's a lot more happening beyond our line of sight. But this particular hacker and the materials they are dealing with is troubling because why would they be hacking in to try to gather this kind of information during the COVID pandemic? It sort of reinforces the idea that this was a bit of an operation where the CCP was not only poisoning the world, and particularly the United States, but monitoring how we would react and monitoring the health impact on the targets. Otherwise, why would you be going after this kind of information? So this is a cyber issue, but also back to the COVID-19 pandemic. What was the CCP really trying to do?
Wow, what a way to shed a light on such a thing that, you know, is talked about frequently, but that just another element to it that really helps expose and understand, you know, what was probably the largest thing that's happened in the last 100 years in terms of, you know, public health. I want to get, going back to hacking specifically though, I want to get your assessment of the long-term risks posed by these espionage campaigns to critical sectors like healthcare, law, academia.
Well, this is another element of what the CCP does. It's comprehensive. It goes after our institutions, and they have a plentiful supply of people, maybe too many of which we actually trained in our universities and corporations, but they have a plentiful supply of very capable hackers, and they put this digital army out there to everything from trolling people who are critics and dissidents to actually going after and gathering significant information. If you add the muscle of artificial intelligence, they have the potential to weaponize things in a way that really put almost every institution that we have at risk if we don't build sufficient defenses, detections, and maybe better practices on our part. So I think what we're getting is an early warning signal of you can't really have normal economic and diplomatic relations with a country that engages in this kind of activity. We have to have some guardrails, and now the burden is on the United States government to maybe put some of that big, beautiful bill resources to protecting our homeland in this regard.
And when we turn to the practical steps, should organizations that may have been targeted by this Hafnium or similar groups, you know, should they be doing something differently than they had been doing, even if, you know, they weren't affected? As you said, this is kind of a warning sign, or is this just sort of standard cybersecurity and, you know, not that much has been revealed?
Well, my take on it would be that we somewhat learn as we go. As we find areas where they have been able to get into particular institutions, corporations, industries, that we work with those involved to learn best practices. about what should government, law enforcement, homeland security, national security be doing in collaboration with our private sector, whether in research or technology development, to be able to guard against these kinds of things. And whether we're looking at banking, legal, or other industries and infrastructure of our society, we have to make sure that we're doing all we can outside of government. But ultimately, the first reason we have a federal government is to provide for the common defense, and we need the capacity of information gathering and monitoring of that federal government to help the private sector do better in this area.
So the private sector's role is one more of defense of its systems, but do you see, I mean, this was a really interesting case in which we found the person in Italy and we had him deported, brought back to the United States. So is this a new age where the federal government has to go on offense to try to find these actors? Because this had happened years ago.
You know, I agree. And my sense is that we wouldn't have known that this person was in Italy if we hadn't had some reasonable early warning or detection and the person was tracked there. Or it's one of these cases where the footprints of this exercise led to the need for international cooperation. We have that with some governments more than others. The relationship between Prime Minister Maloney and President Trump is pretty good at the moment. So one would hope that that filters down to operational cooperation between our governments in areas of homeland and national security. There are issues in the old world of tracking organized crime, and that is where you would have had some monitoring and collaboration in law enforcement and sort of the technical signals intelligence and other areas. And that would have looked at China and Italy and other places that have those entities. And so hopefully what we're doing is graduating out of best practices of the past and recognizing we have a new global threat that requires action at home for sure, but collaboration with allies. And Italy also hard hit by the COVID pandemic. So maybe this is not a coincidence that these hackers ended up in that location too.
The Trump administration is moving to block foreign adversaries, especially China, from buying U.S. farmland. Officials say the issue goes beyond national security concerns over American control of the food supply. It also involves the theft of intellectual property. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has the details.
Action to ban the purchase of American farmland by Chinese.
The U.S. is working to ban Chinese nationals and other foreign adversaries from purchasing U.S. farmland. Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins announced what's called a National Farm Security Action Plan. It's a series of actions to safeguard America's food supply.
American agriculture is not just about feeding our families, but about protecting our nation and standing up to foreign adversaries who are buying our farmland, stealing our research, and creating dangerous vulnerabilities in the very systems that sustain us.
Rollins was joined by several cabinet officials and nearly a dozen governors in announcing the move. On top of restricting farmland purchases, they're also working to reclaim the farmland already acquired by Chinese companies. The main concern here is that the Chinese Communist Party is directing its companies to purchase farmland to gain control of the U.S. domestic food supply.
Food security, just like energy resilience, just like where we get our water, that's all national security.
We are indeed in a new world where kinetic warfare is not the first choice of our rivals. It is acquiring our supply chain in agriculture. It's setting up spy shops on land next to military bases.
The Chinese scientists that are in our own universities and research that are stealing intellectual property. It wasn't too long ago they were taking rice seeds from my alma mater.
Other officials emphasize that Chinese-owned companies control land near sensitive military sites. See this map unveiled by the Department of Agriculture on Tuesday. The red blocks are actual military bases. You can see the hundreds of thousands of acres owned by Chinese companies and how close they are to these sensitive military sites. And this issue has been a concern for years. Last year, the Biden administration stopped a majority-owned Chinese company called Mine One from buying 12 acres of land next to Warren Air Force Base in Wyoming. Wyoming, just about a mile away. This base is home to nuclear-armed intercontinental ballistic missiles. Secretary Rawlins also announced that as of Tuesday, she'll be a member of the Committee on Foreign Investment in the U.S. This is an interagency committee responsible for tracking and investigating foreign nationals' real estate and business purchases. Reporting by Jack Bradley, NTD News.
Coming up, critical rare earth materials banned by export rules are still making their way into the U.S. That's despite last year's export restrictions from China. We take a closer look. And the Philippines Defense Secretary is pushing back on claims that U.S. presence provokes China's aggression. As tensions grow, he weighs in on the risk of war.
I feel that the prospect of war is it's not imminent. I believe it is remote, but that would entirely depend entirely upon the internal conditions of China.
That and more in just a minute here on China in Focus. Welcome back to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Rare earth minerals like antimony, gallium, and germanium are still making their way into the U.S. despite China's export ban last December. Since the ban, unusually large shipments have been arriving from places like Thailand and Mexico. Shipping records suggest at least one Chinese-owned company is involved. These minerals are critical for semiconductors, batteries, and military tech, and the U.S. has been scrambling to secure supplies elsewhere. From last December to April, U.S. imports of antimony oxides topped 4,000 tons, more than the total of the past 3 years combined. At the same time, Chinese customs data shows that Thailand and Mexico have become the top exporters of Chinese antimony. Because of this trade arrangement, U.S. imports of these critical minerals are matching pre-ban levels, but at higher prices. China responded by cracking down on transshipments and smuggling in May. Offenders could face fines, export bans, or even jail time. But with prices soaring due to strong demand, some are still willing to take the risk. China is racing to build massive AI-powered data facilities in the desert, despite U.S. chip export restrictions. A Bloomberg report Tuesday says Chinese firms plan to install over 115,000 U.S. restricted NVIDIA chips. They will be spread to power more than 30 data centers, mostly located in northwestern China's Xinjiang region. If successful, those sites could then be used to train next-generation AI models, like the ones from China's AI startup DeepSeek. It's unclear how China plans to legally obtain the chips. The U.S. banned them from export in 2022, citing fears they could boost China's military capabilities. Since then, any purchase requires a U.S. export license, and none have been approved for China. Still, official documents from China's northwestern region show plans for 39 data centers moving forward, all aiming to use restricted NVIDIA chips. U.S. officials estimate only about 25,000 restricted chips are in China, far below what's needed for this kind of project. Bloomberg says there's no evidence China has or can gather 115,000 restricted NVIDIA chips. But construction is already underway in a remote Xinjiang region where cheap coal and renewable power make the sites attractive. Washington is probing potential smuggling networks involving routes through Malaysia and Singapore. At the same time, NVIDIA says it follows all U.S. export rules, but it questions how effective those restrictions really are. The European Union and China are marking 50 years of diplomatic relations this week, but the head of the EU is warning that China poses growing risks to the continent's economy and security. NTD international correspondent David Vives reports from Paris.
As July 8th marked the 50th anniversary of EU-China bilateral diplomatic relations, EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen reflected on the nature of the relationship. She began by praising China as a great global civilization that over the past 50 years has become a major global power. While she said hoping to establish new relations with Beijing, she criticized Beijing's recent diplomacy. On June 3rd, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi stated in Berlin that China cannot accept a Russian defeat in Ukraine, as this could allow the United States to fully shift its focus to China.
China's unyielding support for Russia is creating heightened instability and insecurity for Europe. We can say that China is de facto enabling Russia's war economy, and we cannot accept this. And I've always said how China continues to interact with Putin's war will be a determining factor for EU-China relations going forward.
On the economic front, von der Leyen warned that the EU's dependence on Chinese raw materials has increased. She also pointed to Beijing's ongoing practice of flooding global markets while disregarding international trade agreements as a major risk.
China is running the largest trade surplus in the history of mankind. Its trade surplus with our union has surpassed 300 billion euros last year. And this is, while it is getting harder and harder for European companies to do business in China.
Several EU countries in recent months have called on the European Union to better protect itself from the flood of goods coming from China. Since the Trump administration implemented new tariffs of up to 55% on Chinese imports, the European Central Bank has reported a 2 to 3% increase of Chinese goods exports to Europe. While the number is small, the trend is accelerating to the point of threatening industries within the EU bloc. French Minister of Finances Éric Lombard said on Monday, "We must protect our industry. Otherwise, the Chinese policy that consists of having a production capacity of more than 50% global market share in each sector will kill our industry." At the June G7 summit in Canada, Ursula von der Leyen warned of a new China shock, blaming Beijing trade practices since joining the World Trade Organization in 2001. She accused China of using models of domination, dependence, and blackmail against its trade partners. David Vives, NTD News, Paris.
Philippines Defense Secretary Gilberto Teodoro is pushing back on the idea that U.S. influence is driving China's aggression in the South China Sea. He says Beijing is charting its own course. On Wednesday, he warned of rising tensions in the Indo-Pacific region and the real risk of military conflict. Take a listen.
I feel that the prospect of war is it's not imminent. I believe it is remote. But that would entirely depend entirely upon the internal conditions of China. Insofar as the Philippines is concerned, we are not allowed by our constitution to seek war as an instrument of national policy. What we are doing is to create, just like Singapore does, a credible deterrence coupled with diplomacy. You can't have diplomacy without a credible deterrent force.
The Philippines has been one of the most vocal critics of China's sweeping claims over the South China Sea. Beijing says it owns almost the entire area. A 2016 international ruling rejected those claims, but China still enforces them, even in waters near Taiwan, Vietnam, Malaysia, and the Philippines. Ships from these countries often face harassments from Chinese Coast Guard vessels in the disputed waters. That's all for today's China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. If you have any feedback on the show or have something you'd like to see us cover, send us an email at chinainfocus@ntd.com. We'd love to hear from you. For On the Clock original news coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.